Good evening, or perhaps good night, everyone. Before we start the video, it's boring historic here. If you're new to our channel, make sure to subscribe so you never miss our latest sleepy stories and updates. So tonight's story is the evolution of the candle holder. Let's begin. Tonight we won't be chasing kings or exploring battles. We won't be solving mysteries or crossing great oceans. No, this story is different. This is the story of something quiet, something simple, something that never tried to be important but stayed with us through centuries all the same. It is the story of the candle holder, not the candle, not the flame, but the thing that holds it. This is a journey through stillness, through flickering rooms and silent walls, through dim kitchens and quiet monasteries, through places where a single flame lit the way, and something sturdy beneath it kept it safe. Over thousands of years, the candle holder has changed, just a little. Its shape, its weight, its handles, its color, but it has always done the same gentle job, to hold the light without asking for attention. So if your eyes are already feeling heavy, that's all right. We're going to take our time, slowly, quietly, one flicker at a time. Let us begin where the light begins, not with fire, but with the hand that holds it. Part 1. The Flickering Beginnings. Primitive light and early supports. Long before candlelight danced on castle walls or glimmered in drawing rooms, humans lived in the humble glow of simple flames. These earliest forms of nighttime light came not from candles as we know them, but from bowls of burning fat. Often rendered from animal tallow or fish oils, these makeshift lamps were rudimentary and practical. People poured the grease into concave stones, hollowed bones, or carved bits of clay, placing a twisted piece of plant fiber, moss, or reed as a wick. These objects weren't designed for aesthetics. Their sole purpose was to prevent total darkness once the sun went down. The bowls were set into small pits in the floor or balanced upon flat stones, sometimes held in the crook of a rock wall. No ornate stands, no polished holders. These were primitive supports in the most literal sense, places where fire could be cradled without tipping. Smoke hung heavy in the thatch-roofed air. Walls darkened with soot. Nothing about this arrangement was elegant, but it worked. And as the years passed, hundreds, then thousands of them, people returned to this same problem again and again. How do you keep a flame from falling over? The idea of a candle holder was not yet born, but its shadow lingered behind every flame set atop stone or earth. Part 2, Wax and Wick. The candle itself appears. The next stage in the candle holder's story does not begin with the holder at all, but with the candle. Long into the Bronze Age, societies across Europe, Asia, and Africa began refining the art of making light portable. Rather than burning pools of oil, artisans discovered that wax, especially beeswax, could be formed around a central wick and stood upright. This innovation changed everything. Now the light could be moved from room to room. No longer was it bound to a bowl or niche in the wall. The candle was born, and with it, the slow necessity for something to hold it safely. But at first, the solutions remained unremarkable. A shallow dish of clay with a little hole in the middle, a rock with a carved depression, a lump of metal pounded into a dish-like form. It wasn't about style. It was about not letting hot wax pool all over the floor. Even as early as 500 BCE, people were placing their stubby candles into tiny stands made of bronze or ceramic. These weren't ornate. They didn't match the furniture. They didn't sparkle. They simply stood there, doing their job. Some were wide-based to avoid tipping, others narrow, wedged into gaps in walls or floors. And so began the subtle shift in human behavior. The light moved with you. You carried it in one hand, cautiously, and needed the other free to open a door or hold a child's hand. In this awkward moment of balancing utility and motion, the candle holder slowly became more important than anyone noticed. Part 3. Roman iron and clay. A standard begins to emerge. By the time Rome had sprawled its way across Europe and parts of Africa and Asia, lighting technology had modestly improved. The Romans had a fondness for oil lamps, yes, but they also utilized candles, particularly in colder climates where wax hardened more consistently. Candle holders began to take on forms that were consistent, if not yet beautiful. In iron, bronze, and terracotta, the Romans cast small, footed platforms with sockets to fit candles. They made them low and squat to avoid tipping, with handles sometimes attached for portability. These were not rare items, but neither were they treasured. In the homes of common citizens, a simple iron stand might sit in a corner for months unused. When lit, it offered a dull yellow glow, just enough to see a clay plate or sandals by the door. It was not uncommon for wax to melt and spill over, hardening into useless blobs. Cleaning these holders was not a priority. Candle holders were practical, not precious. If they broke, they were replaced without thought. If they rusted, they were ignored. These items rarely made their way into historical records because no one thought they were worth mentioning. Only in the grander homes of Roman officials or temples did candle holders become slightly more refined. Bronze with a touch of engraving, small vines or leaf patterns etched along the stem. But even then, their purpose remained the same: keep the light off the floor, keep the wax from dripping, and do so quietly. No one ever threw a feast in honor of a candle holder. Part 4. Dark Ages, Dim Flames. The candle holder stagnates. With the fall of Rome, many technologies in Europe either declined or became less consistent, and the candle holder was no exception. In the early medieval period, the use of light remained functional and sparse. Most peasants still relied on fat lamps, resin torches, or small wax candles stuck directly into wood or iron prongs. A candle might be jammed into a crack in the wall or balanced in a lump of clay. The candle holder in this era did not evolve so much as it remained quietly unnoticed. Its presence was assumed, its development stagnant. In monastic settings, however, candles found renewed importance. Scribes copying text by hand needed consistent light. Candle holders in these abbeys were still plain, iron or lead, maybe some early brass, but placed methodically beside parchment desks. Some had small drip trays. Others were little more than spikes. They weren't decorative, but they were essential. These early holders gave just enough light to read a line, scratch out a letter, or look up a Latin phrase. Nothing more. For centuries, these objects remained uncelebrated, unmarked. There were no candle holder makers of renown. No guilds, no celebrations of design. They existed, they worked, and that was enough. Part 5. Gothic Shadows, Height, Iron, and the Church. By the High Middle Ages, roughly the 12th through 15th centuries, candle holders began to grow taller. Cathedrals and castles required more light, and more elaborate holders followed. Ironworkers began to produce tall, vertical candle stands that could hold multiple flames at once. These were often found in churches, standing near altars, behind pulpits, beside choir stalls. The designs were still restrained, often simple spirals or twisted rods with flat trays, but they rose higher than before, and they did not move. In homes, similar but simpler holders emerged, tripod bases of iron, sometimes fixed to a wooden post, with flat trays for catching wax. These could be carried, but usually weren't. They stood in corners or near hearths. Still, the average person rarely owned more than 1 or 2 candles, and so a single holder was enough. There was little need for variety. No one thought of matching their candle stand to their table. Form followed function, and the function was simply not falling over. Candle holders of this period rarely outshined the candles themselves. Light was precious. Wax was expensive. The object that held the light was seen as utilitarian, even in sacred spaces. The artistry of the Gothic world did not fully extend to the tools of illumination. Part 6. Renaissance Refinement. Form meets hesitant function. As Europe entered the Renaissance, the flame was not only a tool, but a companion. In wealthier homes, candlelight was increasingly seen as something to be presented rather than merely tolerated. Candles themselves remained a luxury, often made from beeswax rather than tallow, and with this refinement came modest changes in their holders. Brass, pewter, and even silver candle holders began to appear on dining tables, desks, and parlors. They still served a simple purpose, but now there was an expectation that they also reflect a sense of grace. Designs became rounded, bases were wider. Some candle holders had curved handles or short stems with subtle embellishments. Artisans might etch a floral pattern along the rim or add a barely noticeable twist in the stem. These weren't extravagances, they were quiet upgrades. The candle holder remained largely in the background, noticed only when absent. In paintings from this period, one occasionally sees a candle stand resting in shadow. It is rarely the focus. Perhaps it rests near a scholar's elbow or a lady's lacework. and yet they became part of the visual furniture of life. Still, there were no mass trends, no sudden innovations, just a slow, quiet refinement that moved at the pace of melting wax. Part 7. Baroque and the Rise of the Candelabrum. In the 17th and early 18th centuries, the Baroque period swept across Europe, and with it came a flair for drama, ornamentation, and display. Now, finally, the candle holder received something like attention. In grand homes, palaces, and opera halls, chandeliers and candelabra became symbols of wealth and grandeur. These holders were not single stems, but branching towers of light. They held 5, 10, even 20 candles. They hung from ceilings in great arcs or stood on marble tables, gleaming with polish. Yet even as these Baroque candle holders grew larger and more decorated, with gold leaf, crystal droplets, and carved angels, their basic purpose remained unchanged. They held candles, they caught wax, and they stayed upright. The candelabrum was born not from a need for light, but from a desire to show off one's ability to afford light. It was a quiet, flickering form of economic declaration. In common households, however, nothing changed. A single brass holder might serve for a decade. Wax was still expensive, candles still burned out quickly, and so while the aristocracy adorned their halls with candelabra shaped like trees and temples, most people still tucked a single candle into a familiar dish on a bedside table. Enlightenment and standardization. As the 18th century progressed and Enlightenment thinking spread, rationality touched even the candle holder. Mass production techniques allowed for more consistent, interchangeable parts. Candle holders became standardized, socket sizes were more uniform, bases were more stable. Makers in England, France, and Germany produced thousands of nearly identical holders for export. Pewter and tin were common materials, with some holders made of pressed glass or ceramic. By now, the candle holder had found its shape. A broad base, a central stem, a socket for the candle, and perhaps a tray to catch wax. Occasionally a little finger loop for carrying. There was nothing wild about it. Candle holders became the kind of household item that was inherited not for sentiment, but for practicality. Design shifted with fashion. Georgian holders had elegance. Victorian ones had modest curves, but all followed the same essential mold. The flame, the wax, the holder, all worked together in a cycle that had not changed in centuries. People took it for granted, and that was a kind of victory for the object, to be so useful that one forgets your presence. Part 9. The Electric Eclipse. By the late 19th century, the electric light began its long and steady advance. It started in cities, then towns, then homes. First as a novelty, then a necessity. And so the candle holder, once a staple of life, began its slow retreat. In wealthier homes, electric chandeliers replaced candelabra. In simpler homes, switches replaced matches. Candles became decorative, and their holders followed suit. No longer tools of necessity, they were placed on mantels, shelves, and dining tables for effect, not function. New candle holders were often glass, wrought iron, or ceramic, more about appearance than durability. Some were shaped like leaves, hands, or vines. Others were minimalist, almost invisible. The candle itself was no longer a source of light, but a symbol of ambience. Its holder no longer had to be stable or efficient, just beautiful or quaint. People lit candles to relax, not to see. They placed them beside bathtubs, dinner plates, or fireplaces already glowing with electric heat. And still, the holder remained, quietly holding, quietly enduring. Part 10. The Candle Holder Today. A relic still standing. Now, in our present age of screens and digital light, the candle holder remains among us. Not in every home, perhaps, but in more than you might guess. It appears in shops labeled home decor. It is given as a gift, often unused. It rests on sideboards and coffee tables, near dusty books and potted plants. And yet the form is recognizable. A flat base, a narrow socket, a simple elegance that has not changed in over 2,000 years. People may not know where their candle holder came from. It may have been purchased on a whim, or inherited, or forgotten in a drawer. But when the power goes out, or when a birthday cake appears, or when someone seeks comfort in quiet flame, the candle holder returns to its post, and it holds the light as it always has. There are few objects in human history so quiet, so unchanged, and so persistently useful. The candle holder does not evolve quickly. It does not demand attention. It waits, it carries, it holds. and when the light is gone, it remains. Part 11. Candle holders across cultures, forms, flames, and forgotten crafts. While much of Western history focuses on Europe's gradual evolution of the candle holder, other regions had their own quiet journeys, each shaped by the available materials, spiritual needs, and domestic habits of the people. In ancient India, for example, the diya was more than a lamp. It was a symbol of light over darkness, used in homes, temples, and festivals like Diwali. Though technically an oil lamp, the diya's clay body and molded base served many of the same functions as early candle holders. It was cradled in hands, placed on altars, and carefully set on floor patterns made of colored powder. There were brass versions too, finely wrought and built to last for generations, used in more permanent spaces. In China, traditions leaned toward oil lamps rather than candles for much of history, but when candles were used, their holders were often elegant porcelain creations or tall bronze stands used in palace rituals. Some featured stylized cranes or lotuses, with the candle held atop a flower-shaped socket. The goal wasn't to flood a room with light, it was to create ambience, shadows, and mood. In the Islamic world, ornate lanterns often held candles, intricately pierced, to cast delicate shadows through cut metalwork. These weren't open holders, but enclosed spaces, giving the candle a quiet dignity. Each culture treated the holder not merely as a tool, but as an extension of its views on light, warmth, and the sacred. And yet, across oceans and deserts, in temples and kitchens, the candle always needed something beneath it. Something that would not burn, would not tip, and would wait quietly in the dark. Part 12. Materials and Metallurgy: Clay, Iron, Brass, and Beyond. Over thousands of years, the materials that shaped candle holders quietly told a parallel story, one of geography, technology, and patience. The earliest supports for flame were made of stone and clay, shaped by hand and dried in the sun. These holders were imperfect, but they resisted heat and could be replaced with little effort. Clay remained popular for centuries, particularly in rural regions where people made their own holders from local soil. If one cracked, another could be molded in a matter of hours. Metal came later, introduced not by design but by necessity. Iron was sturdy and could support the growing height of candle holders without warping. Blacksmiths made simple iron spikes and bases, functional, enduring. In colder climates, iron didn't crack or crumble. As trade expanded, copper and bronze became more accessible, especially in the hands of skilled artisans. These materials offered a balance, strength with the potential for decoration. You could carve a vine, polish a stem, or twist a base, and still have a stable object that wouldn't tip. Brass and pewter arrived with the rise of domestic craftsmanship. These metals allowed for smoother shapes, wider bases, and mass production. They didn't rust easily and took on a warm sheen when polished. Silver and gold were rarely used for ordinary holders, but occasionally they appeared in religious contexts. Massive candle stands in cathedrals, menorahs in temples, sacred holders in palaces. Even today, candle holders come in glass, ceramic, aluminum, and steel. And yet, despite all this technological progress, the shape, base, stem, socket remains. It seems that once humans figured out how to safely hold a candle, the design required only subtle refinement. A small dish, a quiet metal, nothing more. Part 13. Rituals and Religion: The Holder in Sacred Space. In nearly every human religion, light has played a central role, and where there is light, there is a need to hold it. The candle holder, so often invisible in secular life, takes on new meaning in sacred space. In Christian churches, especially Catholic and Orthodox ones, tall candle stands line the altar. Each candle may symbolize prayer, memory, or divine presence. The holders are rarely flamboyant, but they are made to last. Some are carved from marble, others cast in bronze. The wax drips down their sides like a slow offering, remade each week. In Jewish homes, the Shabbat candle holder is placed before sundown on Fridays, its two flames marking the beginning of rest and peace. On Hanukkah, the menorah or Hanukkah becomes the center of the ritual. Its branches must be equally spaced. Its balance must be perfect. The candle holder here is not background. It is a vessel of memory, identity, and belief. In Buddhist and Hindu traditions, light offerings, often made with ghee lamps or candle-like structures, are placed in holders designed not just for function, but for reverence. In temples, You will see brass holders shaped like lotuses, serpents, or wheels. Each flickering light speaks of impermanence, devotion, or cosmic rhythm. And beneath every flame is the holder, silent, motionless, but essential. Even in secular rituals, weddings, memorials, vigils, candles are placed in holders, then lit with careful intention. The holder elevates the act, gives it form, and prevents it from vanishing too quickly. For a moment, the candle holder becomes something more than support. It becomes a quiet participant in meaning itself. Part 14. Candle holders in literature, art, and imagination. Despite their humble role, candle holders have appeared in countless works of literature and art, not as protagonists, of course, but as quiet witnesses. In Gothic novels, they are carried down dark hallways, dripping wax on worn floorboards. In poetry, they are sometimes metaphors for stillness or for the passage of time. A candle slowly burning low, the holder catching each drop. This image repeats across cultures and genres, suggesting something eternal. Artists have long painted candlelight scenes where the flame takes center stage, but always, somewhere in the frame, is the holder. Vermeer's quiet interiors, Rembrandt's shadowed portraits, even Caravaggio's dramatic chiaroscuro all depend on light stabilized by something we rarely notice. In 18th century still lifes, candle holders are shown alongside fruit, wine, or skulls, symbols of indulgence, mortality, and fleeting beauty. In fairy tales, the candle holder may be a guide. The servant carries it ahead of the young prince. The librarian lights one before unlocking a dusty door. The flame moves, the holder steadies. Its silence makes it trustworthy. No one fears a candle holder. No one praises it. But it is always there, an object that brings light without asking for attention. Even in modern film, a single candle in a darkened room changes everything. Whether held in a metal loop or set into a ceramic base, it becomes the pivot between fear and comfort, between absence and presence. And beneath it, always, is the same structure. Quiet, patient, and oddly eternal. Part 15. Failed inventions and the quiet resilience of the candle holder. In an age of invention, countless objects have been improved, replaced, or discarded. Yet the candle holder has endured, not because no one tried to innovate it, but because it is already perfect in its simplicity. Over the centuries, inventors offered many improvements: adjustable holders, self-extinguishing mechanisms, spring-loaded designs that pushed the candle upward as it burned. Some had sliding trays to catch more wax. Others could swivel or clamp to furniture. All worked in theory. Few survived widespread use. In the 19th century, as domestic safety became more important, people began to fear open flame. Candle holders with glass chimneys were introduced, lanterns with built-in reflectors, holders designed to contain fire, but most of these added complexity without solving any urgent problem. A simple brass base, it turned out, did the job just fine. Today, companies sell electric versions of candles and holders, fake flames flickering in plastic tubes. They never melt, never smoke, and yet many people still return to the real thing. They strike a match, they watch the wick catch, and they place it in a holder that may be new or antique, simple or ornate, but always recognizably the same. The candle holder, unlike the light bulb or the oil lamp, was never meant to shine. It was meant to hold, to offer a place for the light to stand. And in that task, it has succeeded quietly for more than 2 millennia. Part 16. The quiet geometry of bases, width, weight, and the avoidance of tipping. It may seem unnecessary, perhaps even absurd, to devote an entire section to the shapes of candle holder bases. And yet, when we consider the primary purpose of a candle holder, to support a vertically standing object prone to softening, dripping, and occasionally falling, we realize that the base is not merely a design detail. It is the foundation upon which the entire purpose of the object depends. From the earliest stone-carved cradles to the mass-manufactured metal discs of the 19th century, the base has always held a kind of quiet authority. It does not speak, it does not flicker, it does not burn, but it resists motion. Early candle holders, especially those found in Roman ruins or medieval digs, often featured a wide, flat base, sometimes round, sometimes hexagonal, occasionally even square, though this was less common. These broad-bottom designs were not the product of mathematical speculation or artistic choice, but of simple cause and effect. A narrow base led to tipping, Tipping led to fire, and fire, in a home made of thatch or aged wood, was not something taken lightly. The necessity of stability became a governing principle of candle holder design, and it remained so for centuries. And so, quietly, generations of smiths, potters, and artisans devoted time to flattening, widening, and weighting the bottom of an otherwise unassuming tool. In some regions, such as Northern Europe, during the damp, drafty winters of the 17th century, extra weight was sometimes added to the base by incorporating iron cores beneath decorative metal exteriors. These weighted holders sat firmly on long banquet tables, unmoved by elbow bumps or heavy cloths. The practice of adding ballast, although rarely written about in any celebratory tone, reflected a broader cultural understanding. The flame must not fall. As time passed and materials diversified, the base remained largely unchanged. Even in the elegant candle holders of the Victorian parlor or the elaborate candelabra of Versailles, the base remained a constant, disguised perhaps by scrollwork or floral feet, but still wide, still flat, still immovable. It is worth noting that few inventions have remained so consistent over time. The width of a candle holder's base, whether 2 inches or 10, has rarely strayed from its essential function. It is the stillness beneath the flicker, the quiet geometry that allows the flame to rise without fear. In modern candle holders, particularly those sold in gift shops or department stores, the base is sometimes minimized for aesthetic effect. And yet, even in these cases, manufacturers find subtle ways to maintain stability through materials with high density, slip-resistant pads, or flared metal skirts hidden beneath sleek exteriors. The candle holder base, then, continues its ancient duty under a veil of silence. It is perhaps the most boring part of the most boring object, and yet it is also the most vital. Without the base, there is no candle holder. And without the candle holder, there is no controlled light. Part 17. Handles, loops, and grips. The minor mechanics of carrying a flame. As candle holders moved from being fixed instruments to portable companions, there emerged a modest yet quietly consequential innovation: the handle. It is difficult to pinpoint the exact moment when someone first affixed a loop or grip to the side of a candle holder, but it must have been prompted by a practical problem. Perhaps someone, in the half-dark of a smoke-scented evening, reached for their candle holder only to find it too hot or too smooth. Or perhaps, more likely, they knocked it over. Whatever the case, the solution was not grand, just a small protrusion, enough for a few fingers, allowing the object to be moved with minimal risk. Early examples of candle holder handles were plain and direct. A simple ring of iron fused to the base, or a short arc of brass set just far enough from the socket to avoid the heat. In some examples from the 16th century, one finds shallow dish-style holders with an upturned tab or loop pressed into the edge like an afterthought. They were not elegant. They were not described in letters or praised in inventories. They were simply there, and once they were there, they stayed. The single-finger loop became a minor standard in portable candle holders by the 18th century. Often called chambersticks, these flat-based holders with a short central socket and a circular finger hole on the side became common companions for nightly routines. One could imagine a household of the time: stone floors, heavy curtains, silence punctuated by creaks, where each member before retiring lifted their own chamberstick and shuffled down hallways washed in faint yellow light. The handle ensured that the fingers never touched hot metal, that the flame remained upright, and that wax did not spill unnecessarily with each movement. As industrial casting processes improved in the 19th century, handles became more ornate. Some were shaped like curls of ivy or delicate scrolls. Others took the form of lion heads or twisting tendrils. Yet even in these flourishes, the purpose remained consistent. The handle had no need to impress. It simply offered the quiet reassurance of mobility without mishap. In colder climates, double-handled holders occasionally appeared, two small arcs rising like ears from opposite sides of the base. Their purpose was not grandeur, but balance. One could grip them with gloved hands or thick cloth without tipping the candle. And yet, despite these variations, the single loop remained dominant. There is something about the ergonomics of a solitary grip that suits the slow pace of candle carrying. It demands mindfulness. One cannot rush while carrying a flame. In modern reproductions, the handle is often retained even when candles are no longer meant to be carried. It serves now as a nostalgic gesture, a visual reminder of slower times. Some are too small to actually hold. Some are made of resin and not structurally sound, but they echo a form that once mattered deeply. The handle is a minor mechanical element, but it reflects the core of the candle holder's utility: to safely contain and move light, however briefly, however slowly, from one dark place to another. Part 18. Drip trays, wax pans, and the management of melt. Few features of the candle holder reflect its quiet endurance more than the drip tray, also called a wax pan, or in some traditions, a gutter. This simple, shallow dish, positioned either just beneath the candle's socket or integrated into the base, exists solely to catch what gravity demands: the warm, slow descent of melting wax. It is an unassuming part of the design, often overlooked, but upon closer observation, it reveals a surprising amount about how humans have lived alongside impermanent light. In the earliest days, when candles were short, misshapen, and liable to collapse, melted wax simply spilled where it would. On stone floors, this was tolerable. On wooden tables, less so. Over time, as candles became slightly more reliable, artisans began carving shallow indentations around the socket to contain runoff. These weren't formal trays, but they marked the beginning of spatial awareness in the candle holder. No longer was it just a stick and a lump. It was a structure that accounted for decline. As we move into the late medieval and early Renaissance periods, drip trays became more intentional. Small circular lips surrounded the base of the socket, sometimes raised on a second platform. In pewter and brass holders especially, these trays were formed as part of the casting mold. They weren't wide, just broad enough to catch the few globs that trickled during an ordinary burn. Cleaning them required patience, as the wax would harden, cling, and resist removal. And yet, people did not complain. They scraped gently. They accepted the buildup. The wax pan became not a flaw, but an expected element of use. Interestingly, in some high-status candle holders, the drip tray was designed not just to catch wax, but to reflect light. In polished silver holders, the shallow dish below the flame would gleam softly, doubling the impression of brightness. This was a subtle optical effect. Nothing dramatic, nothing meant to astonish, but it served as a quiet reminder that every part of the holder could contribute to the experience of illumination. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as candles were standardized and molds improved, drip trays became more refined. Some were detachable, allowing for easier cleaning. Others were fixed and flared, extending out like petals. In candelabra, especially those with multiple arms, each arm had its own miniature drip tray, a small scallop dish that resembled a leaf or shell positioned just beneath the socket. Their design varied by maker, region, and taste, but their function remained consistent. Today, drip trays often appear as mere decorative flanges, their purpose largely forgotten in an age of battery-powered flames and scent-infused wax. But in homes where real candles are still used, particularly during holidays or power outages, their relevance quietly returns. One watches the wax fall, collects in the pan, cools, and forms a pale ring of evidence, proof that the light was once alive. The drip tray is a passive component. It does not support, ignite, or guide. It merely receives. And in that patient act of containment, it serves the greater purpose of the candle holder's history, not to shine, but to remain. Part 19. Sockets, sleeves, and the art of fitting a candle. If one were to take a candle holder in hand, any candle holder, from any century or culture, and turn it over slowly in the light, one might find the eye drifting toward the socket. This is the central cavity, the hollow space into which the candle is placed. It may be round or slightly tapered, shallow or deep, smooth or irregular, but it is always there. Without the socket, there is no function, and without function, the candle holder becomes a mere ornament. The socket, despite its seeming simplicity, carries a quiet engineering logic. Its sole responsibility is to hold the candle upright, and it does so by accommodating the candle's base, snugly, but not so tightly that insertion becomes difficult. The earliest sockets, such as those found in Roman-era bronze holders, were often little more than depressions in a raised stem. There was no standardization. and so the user had to trim the candle or pat it with wax scraps to achieve a secure fit. The result was inconsistent. Some candles stood straight, others leaned like tired soldiers. In time, particularly as candle making became more uniform in the 17th and 18th centuries, so too did sockets begin to follow predictable shapes and depths. A standard European taper, narrower at the tip than at the base, meant that sockets could be crafted with a gently narrowing cavity. This conical design allowed the candle to wedge into place with minimal effort. Not too deep, lest the wax drip inside and harden irretrievably. Not too shallow, lest the candle topple with the first gust of wind or clumsy elbow. Some candle holders, especially those meant for repeated use in households or churches, featured sockets with removable brass sleeves. These sleeves could be cleaned, replaced, or resized depending on the candle. In wealthier settings, where candles varied in width depending on room, occasion, or even season, a set of interchangeable sleeves might accompany a single base. It was not a system of flair, but one of preparedness. The candle must fit. That was the rule. In chambersticks and other personal holders, the socket was often shallow but slightly ridged inside to grip soft wax. If the candle wobbled, melted drips would help seal it in place. This was a practical, almost invisible design element, a quiet compromise between the material's imperfections and the user's expectations. One might not notice it unless placing a candle in the dark, by feel alone. Later in the 19th century, as glass and ceramic holders became more common, sockets sometimes became decorative. Scalloped rims, painted interiors, even filigree cutouts appeared, but the depth remained conservative. Makers had learned over hundreds of years that a socket too deep led to unusable stubs, while one too shallow invited instability. The perfect socket, it turned out, was not revolutionary. It was simply correct. And so today, when someone picks up a new candle holder at a market or home decor shop, they may judge it by color, texture, or weight, but the socket remains quietly functional. One inserts the candle, presses gently, and hopes for uprightness. If the socket fits, the flame will follow. And if it does not, one reaches for a knife, a match, or a scrap of paper to assist. It is a small moment, a private one. But in it, the history of socket making, centuries long, endlessly slow, almost entirely undocumented, plays out once again, as it always has. Part 20, Elevation and Intention. The gradual ascendancy of candle holder height. When one thinks of a candle holder, one may picture a short, squat object resting on a table, or perhaps a tall, slender form rising from the floor. The truth is, candle holders have come in all heights, short, medium, tall, and taller still. But the rise in vertical design has not been sudden nor dramatic. It has been slow, incremental, barely noticed, and over time, deeply influential. In the earliest days, height was not a consideration. When the candle itself was a pool of burning fat or a wad of wax stuck to a rock, there was little need to raise the light. The flame flickered at eye level or below it. But as candles became more structured, narrow cylinders with wicks, so too did their holders begin to take shape. The base, the stem, and then the elevation. The vertical stem, modest at first, served two functions. One, to lift the flame slightly higher so that more of a room could be illuminated. And two, to create space between the flame and the surface upon which the holder rested, protecting tables and shelves from the effects of heat and dripping wax. This early form of raised support was functional, not ornamental. A few inches of elevation, nothing more. By the time of the Gothic era, when churches grew taller and ceilings rose like forests of stone, candle holders followed suit, particularly those used in sacred spaces. Tall, wrought iron stands, often 3 or 4 feet in height, were placed near altars and pulpits. These were not carried. They were planted, stationary. They served not only to provide light, but to draw the eye upward, reinforcing the idea of divine height. But even then, the holders themselves were not revered. They were tools, rising in quiet obedience to architectural need. In domestic settings, tall candle holders were less common. Most homes favored table-level illumination. A candle holder of 6 to 10 inches provided enough elevation to see one's plate, one's hands, or one's book, if one were wealthy enough to own one. Taller holders risked instability. They could be knocked over, and wax had further to fall, creating more mess. So for centuries in kitchens, bedrooms, and workshops, height remained modest. It was in the Baroque and Rococo periods, with their taste for grandeur, that height took on decorative value. Tall candelabra stood on mantels, their flames reflected in mirrors. Multiple arms extended from a central column, each rising slightly as if reaching. But this height was not purely functional. It was symbolic, a way of saying, we can afford light. Still, even then, practicality lurked beneath the ornament. Wax trays were added, bases were widened. The taller the holder, the greater the need for balance. In the 19th and 20th centuries, standardization brought height back down to earth. Chambersticks and parlor holders rarely exceeded a foot in height. Their portability demanded compactness. Today, candle holders are found in every size. Tiny tea light cups no taller than a coin, floor-standing torches that brush the ceiling. But height, though more variable now, remains quietly tied to purpose. A candle meant to be seen from across a room must rise. A candle meant to sit beside a bathtub must remain low. The design follows the need, and the need is rarely urgent. It is consistent, quiet, measured. And so the vertical evolution of the candle holder continues, not rushed, not grand, but steady. Each inch of height earned over generations, not for spectacle, but for function. The flame rises, the holder lifts it, and then it waits. Evolution of the candle holder, in which we drift slowly through the nearly imperceptible but long-standing significance of symmetry in the design of candle holders. As always, this chapter will exceed 500 words and continue in the slow, sedate tone designed to lull the listener into a restful state. Part 21. Symmetry and Balance, the quiet comfort of matching sides. When one gazes at a candle holder, any candle holder, whether old or new, ornate or plain, there is a subtle but powerful sensation that often goes unnoticed, a feeling of balance. This is no accident. Symmetry, though rarely discussed in connection with such a humble object, has played a consistent and quietly influential role in its long history. Symmetry, at its most basic, refers to the mirror-like correspondence of parts around a central axis. For candle holders, this usually means that if one were to divide the object vertically down the middle, one half would resemble the other. The base flares evenly on both sides. The stem rises in a straight line. The socket sits squarely in the center. Such alignment provides not only visual calm, but physical stability. A symmetrical candle holder is less likely to tip, wobble, or draw the eye unnecessarily. The earliest candle holders, rough lumps of clay or carved stones, were not always symmetrical, but over time, as function merged with form, the aesthetic of balance began to assert itself. By the time Roman artisans began casting candle stands in bronze and iron, symmetry had become more common, if not fully intentional. A circular base, a vertical stem, a centered socket. These features were easier to produce repeatedly and offered practical advantages: uniform weight distribution, ease of handling, and pleasing appearance. In the Middle Ages, particularly in ecclesiastical settings, symmetry took on a slightly spiritual tone. Two candle holders, placed on either side of an altar, were often identical in form. Their twin flames, standing in equal measure, symbolized divine order. The holders themselves may not have been ornate, but they reflected a sense of stability in their mirroring forms. Even in simpler households, pairs of matching holders became more common, not for ritual, but for balance. On either end of a table, a hearth, or a mantel, symmetry brought a quiet kind of order to dimly lit rooms. With the rise of Baroque and Rococo aesthetics, symmetry became more pronounced, yet more complex. Holders were designed with intricate scrolls, floral motifs, and curved stems, yet always with a mirrored structure. Even multi-armed candelabra, with their elaborate branching forms, adhered to a central axis of balance. Each arm mirrored its counterpart. Each curve repeated itself. The eye, even if unaware, followed the harmony from one side to the other. It was decoration in service of stillness. In the industrial age, symmetry became a standard not only of style but of manufacturing. Molds could produce identical components. Sets of holders could be sold in matching pairs. Consumers came to expect that a holder would not be lopsided, not only because it looked strange, but because it functioned poorly. A crooked holder meant a crooked flame. A crooked flame meant uneven melting. And uneven melting meant wasted wax and potential hazard. Symmetry, then, was not just aesthetic, it was economical. Even in today's minimalist candle holders, Sleek cylinders, geometric stands, glass cubes, symmetry remains. A centered candle, a balanced form, a base that flares evenly. The modern eye, trained by centuries of design, finds comfort in this balance without needing to name it. And so the symmetrical candle holder continues, quiet in its perfection, offering the same face from any angle. It does not shout, it does not shift. It simply stands, matched in all its sides, as if it were always meant to be this way. Part 22, Color, Finish, and the Long Story of Surface Stillness. While many may first consider the candle holder's height, weight, or design, it is the surface, the gentle meeting point between object and eye, that holds a unique and persistent subtlety. The color and finish of a candle holder are not often cataloged in historical records. They are not praised in poems or carefully documented in letters, and yet they have always been there, quietly communicating intention without uttering a sound. A matte finish, a brush texture, a dull brown patina, these are not loud declarations. They are soft statements, slow ones, whispered across centuries. In the earliest candle holders, those made from clay, baked in open fires, or dried beneath the sun, the color was simply the color of earth. Ochres, soft browns, grays mottled with soot. These surfaces were unvarnished and irregular, shaped more by the uneven heat of a rural kiln than by any artistic aim. The finish, if one could call it that, was chalky, porous. But in that imperfection lay a humble grace. There was no need for shine. A candle holder was not there to draw attention. It was there to serve a task. And in that service, the quiet tones of raw clay became their own form of honesty. As metals entered the scene, iron first, then bronze and brass, the colors deepened. Iron was black, or nearly so, tinged with rust as it aged. Bronze carried a dull golden brown hue that, with time and exposure, darkened into green-gray. Brass was warmer, more yellow, though it too would tarnish unless polished. These were not vibrant colors. They were tones of patience. Finishes varied. A newly cast holder, fresh from the hands of a smith, might gleam slightly, but that sheen would fade. Over months and then years, each candle lit above it would drip wax onto the surface. Each hand that moved it would leave oils and dust. These layers accumulated not as dirt but as memory. The finish became lived in, not degraded. In some places and periods, candle holders were deliberately polished. Brass candlesticks in the 18th century, especially in Dutch and English households, were buffed weekly. The task often fell to a housekeeper or servant, whose cloth and wax polish slowly coaxed a soft gleam from the metal. But even this was not a mirror-like shine. It was gentle, warm, a glow, not a glint. Silver candle holders, found more often in churches or upper-class parlors, were occasionally kept brighter, but always with restraint. A too shiny object distracts from the flame. And the flame, after all, was the purpose. As glass and ceramics began to be used for candle holders in the 19th century, color took on new dimensions. Pale blues, greens, soft whites. These were pastel tones, never bold. Opalescent finishes gave the impression of moonlight captured in substance. In Victorian homes, holders might be painted rose motifs, ivy, small birds. But these decorations were almost always muted. Even the color red, when it appeared, was a dark crimson, not fire engine bright. The world of candle holders remained, by its nature, a world of shadows and half-light. Its surfaces were made to receive that kind of illumination, not challenge it. Painted finishes, especially on wooden or enamel holders, wore slowly. The soft chipping of hand-painted edges, the gradual dulling of once glossy surfaces, these were not failures. They were part of the life cycle. A chipped holder did not need replacement. It was still usable, and in being used, it revealed its color's truest form. Not its pigment, but its endurance. There is something unspoken in the way candle holder finishes respond to light. A polished brass stem reflects the flame not as a sharp image, but as a softened echo. A ceramic base in matte glaze disperses the glow into a quiet haze. These effects are not accidental. They are outcomes of a long, slow relationship between material and light. A holder does not command the attention. It moderates it. It frames the flicker without ever outshining it. Color is merely part of that agreement. In today's world, candle holders come in all varieties. There are black metal stands with clean matte coatings. There are glossy silver towers with smooth lacquered bases. There are even electric holders designed to mimic wax. Some are deliberately rustic, painted to look weathered, aged antique even when newly made. Others are glossy and minimal, sold in boxes under bright shop lights. But no matter how they are finished, glossy or dull, vivid or plain, they all serve the same quiet duty. They hold the light. And as one brings a flame to the wick, watching it catch, the finish of the holder seems to shift. In the dark, colors soften. Gloss fades into gentle shadow. What once looked polished becomes peaceful. What once looked plain becomes complete. It is in this moment, perhaps, that the surface of a candle holder reveals its truest purpose, not to declare, not to display, but to rest beneath the flicker, still and unassuming. There is no perfect finish for a candle holder. There is only the one that reflects your room, your hour, your quiet mood. A finish that does not cry out, but waits. That does not compete with the flame, but accepts it. Like the candle itself, the holder is temporary in use, permanent in presence. Its color fades, its surface dulls, but its purpose remains. And so the candle holder, in all its dusty, dim, burnished glory, continues. Not with fanfare, not with brilliance, but with softness, with stillness, with time. The colors shift, the finish changes, and yet the holder stays, waiting for the next candle, waiting for the next night, waiting always in peace. And so the story of the candle holder draws to a close, not with a grand finale or a turning point, but with a slow exhale, as soft and steady as the quiet puff of breath that dims a flame at the end of a long night. This has not been a tale of conquest, invention, or spectacle. There are no revolutions in the story of the candle holder, no glorious triumphs, no sudden transformations. It is a story of quietness, of presence, of the long patience of an object designed not to shine, but to support what does. For thousands of years, through dark winters and dim mornings, across stone chapels and small wooden cottages, in palaces, temples, and modest corners of the world, the candle holder has simply been there, at the edge of the bed, on the corner of a desk, at the center of a dinner table, beneath the flame. Its forms have changed a little. Its materials have shifted, its polish has worn, but its purpose has remained. It holds. That is all. And yet that small task, performed steadily, wordlessly, without need of praise, has allowed humans to read after sunset, to pray before dawn, to walk safely from room to room, and to sit in stillness, watching the shape of light. Now, in our world of switches and screens and effortless brightness, the candle holder might seem like something of the past, a relic, a curiosity. But even here, even now, it continues. Not loudly, not urgently, but faithfully, in quiet homes, in gentle rituals, in moments of stillness. A candle is lit. The wax begins to melt, and beneath it, without ceremony, the holder waits. Perhaps it is good that this story has no sharp edges, no dramatic turns, no dazzling conclusions, because the candle holder never needed to be remembered in brilliance. It only needed to be noticed once, before sleep. So if you ever light a candle again, on a calm evening or during a quiet power outage, or just to see the flame gently move, take a small moment to notice what holds it. The shape, the base, the small ring of metal or clay or wood that doesn't shine, doesn't speak, and doesn't fail. It has waited for you through all the years, and in the soft company of that light, it still does.